Sal Di Stefano, welcome back. How you doing, my friend?
I'm good, man.
My long-lost brother from another mother.
Love you, bro. It's always
Same.
good to see you. Always,
Same.
always.
Well, let's dive right in, man. We got a lot to cover because I feel like it's been a minute since we've last had a catch-up.
It's been a little while. I haven't seen you in a little bit. You've done a lot since the last time I seen you.
Back surgery.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
Yeah. Just and you look great. I mean, you told me you just recently got it.
Like a week and 2 days ago.
I couldn't tell. Which just goes to show you that how good your surgeon is, but also mainly how fit and healthy you were going into it. I think that's a really big deal. A lot of people don't understand. It makes such a huge difference in the outcome is how fit you are or healthy you are going into surgery, and then how well you take care of yourself afterwards.
Yeah, I feel like there's definitely something worth speaking out about. And, you know, there's this narrative in our space that back surgery is like always bad, you know, and certainly you want to avoid it. Like I wish that I had needed to have gotten spine surgery, but some people need it. Some people need to be medically treated. Yeah,
there's a bit of there's a large selection bias of people who get back surgery, and so a large percentage of these people don't have good strength and stability, tend to be overweight, and they're just generally not healthy. So the outcomes are heavily influenced by that. If they were to take and look at people who got surgeries like yours, who were fit, healthy, took care of themselves, did good rehab afterwards, you would see really good outcomes. I mean, this is my experience with clients that I've had. That's true for all surgeries, but especially for surgeries in areas that require so much, harmonious work by muscles to stabilize. Like the spine is it moves in so many different directions. It rotates, flexes, and laterally and extends. And so if you go into it and you're not very strong or fit, you get the surgery, you do the bare minimum rehab, your outcome isn't going to look very good. But if you do those things, I've worked with clients with spinal fusion, which is much more challenging than what you did. The outcomes can be incredible. So the more complex the joint is, the more the outcome is reliant on how well and fit and healthy you are going into it and coming out of it.
Yeah,
for sure. So you're like the perfect candidate. Like a surgeon would look at you and go, "Oh yeah, this will be good."
Yeah, when all else fails, I mean, sometimes you do. I mean, I would probably never want to get a fusion, although I understand why some people make that decision. But I specifically, there is this new technology, artificial disc replacement. Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar, if you know anybody who's ever gotten that other than me at this point, but it makes perfect sense as a more viable and logical alternative to and a better option than fusion, because fusion's not natural.
No.
Do you know that they used to fuse, like before they had artificial knees and artificial like other joints that we now have and take for granted? They used to like fuse the knee.
Yeah, it's basically, this hurts, this is a problem, let's stop it from moving.
Yeah.
And then, obviously what ends up happening later is the surrounding joints start to carry the load or the brunt of movement or mobility. And then you start to see problems that occur proximally and then more distally. So like with spinal fusion, what you'll see is pain reduction, people feel better, but then the discs or the joints above and below start to cause problems. Yeah. And so fusion starts to result in more fusion as you go along.
That's not good. Who wants that?
It's an easy fix for pain, but it's a very temporary one. What you did still requires some strength and mobility and rehab for that same joint. But if you don't do it, then especially after surgery, because after surgery you have restricted movement patterns, or for obvious reasons you had surgery. So if you don't rehab properly and strengthen properly, then you'll just come out of it with, for lack of a better term, poor movement patterns, which will then result in more problems. But if you do things properly, you'll come out of it, and the prognosis is great. You'll have a good chance of better outlook than you went in with, for sure.
Yeah, I'm super excited to get started. I can't yet, but I'm very excited.
Watching you move a week and a half later, I wouldn't have known.
I can now tilt over a sink to wash my face or even wash my hands.
Yeah, you were saying.
Without pain. Yeah. I used to struggle to put on I was like starting to, really struggle to put on my socks, my shoes, my underwear, and to bend over a sink. Like it was getting really bad. Like I would feel like I was breaking in half anytime I would do that, with this like sharp grinding pain localized to my mid back, and now I can do it pain free.
Yeah, that's great.
Already a week and 2 days after my surgery.
Yeah, I think with surgery, if more people understood that, and we really paid attention to it, the success rate would just it would go through the roof. It would absolutely go through the roof. Athletes have great access to this. So you'll see athletes who will get, they'll get their ACL replaced or whatever. Very high success rate with that. Nonetheless, because there's such expensive assets, they'll get like the best rehab. And then of course they're fit and healthy going into it. So you see this great, like, oh my God, how does this guy playing on the field again 6 months later? Well, they train those movement patterns. They strengthen the body. They protected the joint that they just worked on. Average person doesn't typically do that. And the more complex the joint is, the worse the prognosis is, but it's less to do about the surgery. It's more to do with like how strong you are going in and then how well you strengthen coming out.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, I think, why it's taken a while for lumbar artificial disc replacements to gain traction. I mean, it's a very viable, there's tons of data, decades of data at this point on their safety, both in the short term and long term, but it's a more specialized surgery. The standard of care, as you mentioned, for decades has been fusion. But I think it's a much better alternative, and the success relies on, the skill of the surgeon, the patient, obviously, and there are some other contraindications, like if you've got facet joint arthritis, it's not the best choice for you. But for me, I think, and this is one of the problems with people that have suffered from back pain, as I have. I mean, it's very hard to pinpoint the pain generator.
Yeah.
But for somebody whose pain generator is largely discogenic, somebody for whom the pain is largely discogenic, that person's really going to benefit from an artificial disc.
Yeah.
They basically they open up, they go in through the front, they open it up, they scoop out the damaged disc. My surgeon said that my disc was like dried crab almost. It was like so desiccated,
Wow.
And they scoop it out, they clean out the space, and they put in this plate. But I was going to say, the reason why it has been so slow to gain traction is that it's as simple as it might seem to replace a disc. There's a lot of shear force, especially at L5S1, and that artificial disc has to bear the weight of the body.
Yeah.
Whereas it's a lot more ubiquitous, the cervical artificial disc. The lumbar artificial disc, there's a little bit more sort of, I guess, uncertainty.
Of course. And what you don't want to do is, and this is just how a lot of back problems with the disc happen in the first place, is when the muscles surrounding the spine aren't supporting movement well or load well, then the discs start to support it. So the analogy I've used before that tends to make sense is if you think of like a sliding glass door, and it slides on a track, but it's off just a little bit, and you keep sliding it open and closed, that track starts to grind and mess up a little bit versus when it's really well aligned. So with the spine, if we allow the discs to bear the load rather than kind of cushion and support, but the muscles bear the load, that disc is going to go, it'll eventually get fried. It's eventually going to get messed up. So, and that's true for an artificial disc as well. So if you go do a bunch of exercises and it's not the muscle that's supporting you, but it's the disc that's really bearing the load, I mean, you'll have a limited time frame between, when you'll need to have it replaced again or something.
Yeah. No, that's why core strength is so important. I'm super excited to get started with with PT, and because I'm definitely weak now,
of course,
in my lower back. Like my spinal erectors are weak.
Yeah. I-Symmetrics will be really good for you. Super safe, and they build great strength. And what you can do with I-Symmetrics is you can move in different ranges of motion. And there's maybe a 20-degree carryover with the strength that you gain from it, but they're super safe. So an isometric is like there's no movement, right? I'm just tensing and holding against either an immovable object or intrinsically.
So like a static hold. Is that the same thing?
Yeah, static hold, or a more advanced version, which is what you would progress to, would be like I'm holding a good position and then I'm pressing into something that's not moving, so I can generate a lot of force, but nothing's moving and I'm not changing my position. Very safe way to strengthen any joint. And then, the opposition's always like, well, but the strength is really narrow in the sense that it's that position plus maybe 10 to 20 degrees outside of that. Well, then what you do is you move the position a little bit and you apply another isometric. Isometrics are super undervalued. And when you look at their real value, when it comes to strength training, stabilization, its contribution to building muscle, performance, like this is a very big missing piece. I think we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years, like a huge surge in application of isometrics. Strength athletes use this forever and decades past, and it kind of fell out of favor because it doesn't look cool. Like if I post a video of an isometric, I'm doing, it's like, well, cool. What's he doing? He's not doing, he's just straining, right? But when you look at its what it does for strength, the strength gains from isometrics are actually faster and more furious in terms of just how rapidly they accelerate. Now, it starts to plateau very quickly, but in terms of initial strength gains, it's remarkable. And then it's not a great hypertrophy builder in comparison to concentric contraction or eccentric, but it still builds muscle. So that people often think inferior means it doesn't build muscle. No, it still builds muscle, but the benefit of it is it doesn't cause much damage. So I can apply it with more frequency. I can practice it regularly without worrying about overtraining nearly as much. So for advanced or people who are very consistent with workouts, and they're like, what can I add to my routine? But I don't want to really hamper my recovery, like isometrics. Isometrics is great too. And then the data will show that it activates the most amount of muscle fibers, especially if you're new to strength training, because of that exertion. The body's like, oh, the weight's not moving, let's recruit more, which actually makes it a great way for somebody who's just interested in hypertrophy. I just want to build muscle. Do some isometrics before your workout. It primes your body to really activate the most when you go do your lift. Which is funny, because bodybuilders have known this for years. They just called it posing.
But yeah, that's so funny. Is this analogous to how the narrative has sort of shifted around the utility of machines? Like there was this narrative, I think, for a long time that machines only built strength within this extremely narrow range because of the plane in which the machine functions, right? But now I feel like the tide has kind of turned where we're starting to understand that no, actually machines do build strength and hypertrophy almost on par.
So
with free weights.
We're looking at the wrong things. So if we're looking at hypertrophy, they're comparable. If we're looking at strength as applied to the exercise itself or the movement itself, they're actually pretty close, right? The studies would actually show they're probably equal. If you look at muscles activated, quote unquote stabilizer muscles activated, well, they're also equal. So everybody says, well, they're the same. No, they're not. The central nervous system adaptation that comes from exercise also doesn't just build muscle and strength. It also is your ability to perform that movement because it's a skill. So the reason why I favor free weights for most people, now if you're a bodybuilder, you just want to build muscle, okay, fine. But for the average person who wants to build muscle, change how they look, but they're also like, I want this to carry over into the real world in the most effective, efficient way possible. Free weights are closer to the real world than machines are, because when you're manipulating and moving objects in the real world, they're almost always free. Like I lift a chair, it's free. I'm playing with my kids, they're free. And so when I practice a barbell squat versus a hack squat, a barbell squat requires my CNS to adapt in a way that also understands balance. And so is it activating more muscles? I mean, some people would argue. I would argue probably build more muscle with a barbell back squat, although there's debate around that. We can look at data and whatever. Most strength coaches will say barbell back squat. Some bodybuilders will say it doesn't matter. But that's not the important thing for me. The important thing for me is the skill that you're learning, that the body learns, your CNS learns, has this wonderful carryover to the real world. Because if I do any kind of a squat in the real world, it's not on a track. It's never on a track. It's never like a machine. It's like the real world. And so why is that important? Well, you can exercise in ways that dramatically improve your risk of injury, or you can exercise in ways that doesn't really improve your risk of injury that much. And sometimes you can exercise in ways that actually increases the risk of injury. It makes it worse, right? Like a good example of that is if I get really, really strong in certain movements and I don't train in rotation or laterally or in different ways, right? It's like all I like to do is the main lifts, which are great. They're phenomenal. For most people, you'll get great carryover. But let's say I do this for years, right? For a decade, and I'm just getting all this muscle and strength. And I'm good at bench pressing, squatting, deadlifting, overhead pressing. Well, what happens is I get all this strength moving in this plane of motion that my body then starts to feel this huge discrepancy between moving in this plane of motion and everything outside of it. And then what the CNS does is it starts to create safety barriers and says, oh, we're going to keep you moving just in this range of motion or just in this plane because you can generate so much power moving this way. It's like a drag car that doesn't have good, it's not stable moving side to side.
Laterally, yeah.
Right. So then what happens, you get stiff. Your body your CNS actually makes you move in a particular way that keeps you in this range of motion or this plane that you feel safe in. So that's why you get the This is often why you get the myth of being muscle bound. Well, yeah, that's true. You can actually become quote unquote muscle bound if you only work in one plane of motion all the time. Well, you take a guy who could deadlift 600 pounds and bench press 400 pounds and squat 500 pounds, but who never works on rotation or lateral strength or anything like that. And you take that guy and you have him sprint really fast and then have him try and cut. Well, he's generating so much force moving forward that cut, that's a high risk of injury. And so when you see people hurt themselves throwing a Frisbee, at the field, even though they're like, I'm really strong in the gym. So it's really important to understand these things. And what frustrates me is you get really smart people on social media that will debate and discuss this, but what they do is they frame the argument in a way that works for them. So like from a hypertrophy standpoint, there's no difference between okay, yes, but the average person listening to that now doesn't really understand that there are values to training with things that are not on a track or in a machine. And yeah, okay, it's just building muscles, great, but do you want to build muscle and have great movement and be healthy and lower your risk of injury as you get older? I think so.
What's the fastest way to fix weak and lagging muscles?
Weak and lagging muscles, it depends on who we're talking to. For most people, general strength training is going to do this. And for most people, it's good to focus on movement versus muscles. Okay. So if I take somebody who's, everyday person, they're not super experienced. They haven't lifted or strength trained for a long time or exercised for a long time. And they're like, I just want to get stronger. I notice my legs are weak or my back is weak. I'm going to communicate to them differently. I'm going to say something like, I want you to get really good at the skill of squatting or split stance squatting, or I want you to get really good at the skill of deadlifting or rowing or pulling. And rather than try to feel a muscle work, by the way, there's value in that too. So I'm not saying don't do that, but to that person it's more valuable to let's just get you strong at these movements. Now, later on, you've been doing this for a while and you're like, hey, I'm pretty good at squats, but I noticed like my glutes just don't develop from doing squats. Like, what's going on? Then what we'll do is we'll look at your technique and form. You're probably, squatting more with your quads. This is bodybuilding jargon, but essentially I'm going to look at the areas that are underdeveloped and weak, and I'm going to find exercises that are going to help you connect to those areas more. And then we're going to focus on those more. So the example I gave of the glutes is a good one, because you'll hear people say hip thrusts, way better for building the butt than a squat. That's not true. If you look at the data, a barbell squat and hip thrust in people who are well-trained, both build great muscle. The hip thrust targets the glutes more acutely, but because a squat loads it in a stretch position at the bottom, which is where you get a lot of muscle growth, they're pretty equal. However, why are we getting all these anecdotes of people saying, my butt wasn't growing until I did hip thrusts? Well, because these people, when they were squatting, their movement patterns weren't ideal for glute development. It was more for quad development. So what they experienced was a lot of quad growth, not great glute growth. Now, hip thrust, because of the way the load is situated, and you can squeeze the glutes, right? You can really hit the glutes in this kind of shortened position. It helps you feel and target the glutes. So for that person, if somebody comes to me who's been working out for 5 years and they've been squatting and deadlifting, like, my butt won't grow, hip thrust is a great exercise for them.
It helps more easily
connect
with the mind muscle connection.
100%, because you're going to connect to that shortened position. Like, if you're years ago, I interviewed Ben Pekulski, professional bodybuilder. He's also an incredibly intelligent individual, and he said one of the best. And this is something we observed as trainers. So when he said this from a bodybuilder's perspective, I'm like, oh, that's what we notice as well. He said, when you have a muscle that you have a tough time connecting to, one of the best ways to feel that muscle is to do exercises that load it in its shortened or squeezed position, because that's the easiest place to feel it. And then from there, you can progress to, and the hip thrust does that for the glutes. And there's exercise like that for every body part. Like, if I bench press, it's a chest exercise, but some guys and girls are like, I get my delts and my triceps. A great way to get them to feel the chest would be like a cable crossover squeeze, and really feel the chest. And let's go bench press a little bit. Now that we feel where the chest is, we can change our form ever so slightly and connect to it.
Yeah, it's like be really helpful, I guess, to do that as a warm up, right? If you're having difficulty
priming, that's what we call
chest.
Yeah, that's what we call as priming. And again, there's like the science people on social media that they muddy the water a little bit because they'll say, well, the data shows if you isolate a muscle first and hit a compound, you're not activating more muscle fibers. But really, it's not about it's. First of all, I'd like to see a study done with people who have difficulty feeling that muscle, which they don't do. They just take everyday people. But it's really more about if I can get you, for example, and there's studies that support this, if I'm telling you to activate your rhomboids on a row and you're having a tough time feeling it, if I just touch your rhomboids with my finger, hey, squeeze right here.
It helps.
Yeah. It's that feedback, that outer feedback. So if I get you to feel a muscle first with an isolation exercise, then go to the compound, it's going to get you to, oh, that's what I need to feel as I'm pressing or rowing. And
are there gender differences? Like, are men more likely to actually have a positive mind-muscle connection with their pecs and less so with their glutes? And conversely with women, I mean, do you see that women are, better able to activate their glute muscles as compared to men? That's
a really good question. I need to think about that. Women generally tend to be in their bodies more than men, generally speaking. And I mean, we can speculate as to why. Like, they tend to feel things more, probably because they go through different, more changes than men do. Maybe because we're also taught as men to ignore everything that we feel, type of deal.
Push through the pain.
Yeah. So that's generally true. What's interesting, though, is when you take somebody who's never exercised and then you have them do an exercise, their relationship to pain is different than one that is that ends up developing from a longer relationship with exercise. Like, one of my favorite examples, I had a client once that she never worked out, never did anything, and she hired me. She was 50-something years old, and we were doing a workout, and then we were doing a tricep rope press down, real lightweight. I was just teaching her how to do it, and she's doing the exercise, and then she suddenly drops, let's go of the rope, and the weight stack slams, and I'm like, what's the matter? She goes, oh my God, I hurt myself. I said, oh, okay, and I'm like assessing her, like, what? And she's explaining what she's feeling, and then I realized, like, your triceps burning. Like, what you're feeling is your tricep burning. She's like, is that normal? I said, well, yeah. Her relationship to good pain, bad pain, it was just pain. Which, you look at somebody who's very experienced with exercise, they can push themselves really hard. And sometimes they have a relationship with the pain where it hurts, but it feels satisfactory or it feels good because they develop a relationship with pain that's different and I'll say more advantageous or appropriate. Now that can go in the wrong direction too, where you just ignore all pain like a soldier. But I think if you do it right, one of the understated values of exercise is you know your body and you develop a relationship with pain that is more appropriate. So you take somebody who understands their body, does lots of exercise, knows what it feels like when they move this, that, or the other, and they have pain, and they'll be like, that's not right. There's something wrong. I need to go get this looked at. Versus somebody who's like, what's that? What's going on? I don't know what's happening here, type of deal, when it's like, oh, you pulled an erector or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a difference between the kind of pain you experience when you have delayed onset muscle soreness versus like
you had.
Yeah, like I had.
Yeah, like you knew something was off.
Big difference. Yeah, exactly. I want to talk about a study that was published recently. I shared it in my newsletter a couple weeks ago. The title of the study is Total Daily Energy Expenditure Has Declined Over the Last 3 Decades Due to Declining Basal Expenditure, Not Reduced Activity Expenditure. Yeah. So basically, like, what this study sought to examine was the root cause of the obesity epidemic. Is it due to the decline in physical activity that is often speculated to be, one of the potential root causes, or is there something, more covert at play? Are our metabolisms collectively on the decline? And what this study found, it used data from over 4,700 adults in the U.S. and Europe, and basically what it found was that physical activity energy expenditure over the past decade has actually increased over time, whereas basal energy expenditure, so basically the bare minimum of energy that the body requires to sustain its biological functions, has actually declined. Yeah. And underneath that umbrella is, resting energy expenditure due to, muscle maintenance and all that stuff that falls in, within that bucket. But very interesting. Like, what do you think might be the cause there?
I love this conversation so much because you have people on different sides of this conversation who will either quote studies or anecdote and will say it's all this, it's all that. So let me start with the people in my space who love to debate the whole boost your metabolism by building muscle argument. Because what I will say to that is I think it's largely due, and I would bet money it's largely due to the fact that we have less muscle, less strength, and our muscle is less healthy, okay? Dr. Gabrielle Lyon has done a great job of talking about how you could have 10 pounds of muscle that's healthy versus unhealthy, and they look very different. I think it's largely due to that. And muscle is very metabolically active in comparison to other tissues of the body, especially body fat. But you'll get some people who will say, well, the data shows 1 pound of muscle only really burns an extra 10 calories. So fine, gain 5 pounds of muscle, it's only 50 calories a day. That oversimplifies things to such a ridiculous point, because if you look at mammalian metabolism, it's actually one of the most complex things we've ever observed in the universe. I think the human brain is the only thing that's more complex. There are so many things that are happening with metabolism. In fact, I saw one time I saw a meme with everything we've identified in the metabolism, and it was like so dense that you had to like zoom in to read. And that's what we currently know. I think this is very strongly supported, that your metabolic rate, regardless of lean body mass, regardless of how much tissue you have in your body, can either choose to be more or less efficient through mechanisms and interplays that we aren't fully aware of. In other words, a man with 160 pounds of lean body mass, without building muscle, his body can burn more or less calories through many, many different mechanisms. Some might be, how much heat I can generate, maybe through hormone interplays, but there's a lot more there that we don't understand. Like I've had clients many times. This is what makes me upset. You talk to really good trainers and coaches who've been doing this for a decade or more, like people who really experience to work with people. And they'll tell you, I have clients that I quote unquote reverse diet, meaning I increase their calories, have them strength train. They'll gain like 3 or 4 pounds of muscle, but they can eat 800 more calories a day and gain no additional body fat. Or they're eating 800 calories more a day, they're doing less activity, and they got leaner. That just the muscle gain doesn't explain that. There's something else that's going on. So I think it's connected to muscle. I think it's connected to our metabolic health. And I think the best way that I've seen to approach this for yourself, how do I get my, for lack of a better term, metabolism move in a direction that's more advantageous, right? Faster, as they would say in marketing. The best way that I've seen to do this is to tell your body it needs to get stronger while simultaneously feeding it healthy nutrients that it needs to build muscle. Whether you build a lot of muscle or not, move in that direction. I think that tells the body we don't need to be as efficient. We actually prioritize strength. So let's move in this direction, even if you only gain a few pounds of muscle. I think what that leads to, or I know what it leads to in my experience, is a metabolism that burns more calories. And I think what we have today are very metabolically and healthy people, and who are weak. Muscle weakness or lack of muscle, or to be more accurate, lack of strength. This is a silent epidemic. We have obesity, and then we have a lack of strength epidemic. And it's not great. And again, if you look at the data on how to predict all-cause mortality, look, obesity is a pretty good indicator. It might even be a little better. Grip strength. It's just a proxy for overall body strength. But that predicts all-cause mortality remarkably accurately for just a single metric. It's pretty crazy. And again, look at the studies on grip strength. Again, that's a proxy for overall body strength. So I want people to understand there's nothing magical about grip strength. It's just, if you have a strong grip, you probably have a strong body.
It's like a surrogate.
That's it. Yeah. So it's an easy way to test someone's, like, how strong are you generally. The average male, 20-something-year-old male today, their grip, depending on the study you look at, is gripping with like 25 to 30-something pounds less strength in their hand than their fathers did at their age, which is significant. Like that's a big difference. So we're a lot weaker. Muscle is very sensitive to insulin. It has androgen receptors in it, so it makes your testosterone more effective. It balances hormones in ways, or at least makes hormones work better when you start to move towards having more muscle. My best argument for this is that it's protective against being sedentary. Now, why is that important? Look, if you work out for an hour every day, 7 days a week, an hour, you wake up in the morning, you go to the gym, you work out, but then you have a regular job. Average job today is this, sitting down. You're sedentary. You are sedentary. You work out for an hour every day, but you have a desk job, you live a sedentary life. So unless you're every hour of the day getting up and moving, which nobody does, which would be great, but nobody does that, we need to figure out a way to protect ourselves against how life has become. Muscle is a wonderful insurance policy against that. Now, ideally, what you would do is be active all day. Ideally, what you would do is you'd have a treadmill at your desk, like I see you have over there, and you'd walk while working on your computer. Then your Fitbit goes off or whatever, it says you need to move, and you get up every other hour and you do a 10-minute walk or some body weight squats. Like that would be amazing in combination with some strength training. But my experience coaching everyday regular people is they're not going to do that. And I hate it when people communicate ideals that nobody's going to do. It's like, oh, cool. Like, that's nice. Go swim in a cold lake at 4 a.m. to maximize fat, whatever. Like, nobody's going to do that, right? How are we going to communicate to the average person in a way that's going to give them the most bang for their buck? Build some muscle. It's very protective against this right here, sitting all day long. It's not perfect, but it's great in terms of time spent and energy done doing it versus return. So when you look at stuff like that, like if we got everybody, and there was a new study just came out that used, I love this one, how much strength training do you really need to build muscle if you're experienced? So we always see studies that are like, how much strength training do you need to build muscle if you're not experienced?
Like on untrained subjects.
Yeah, untrained, it's so little. Like you could do an I-Symmetric contraction once a week and we would see like a 20% strength gain for a little while. But like, what if you're experienced? Like, okay, well, I work out. Like, what's the minimum I need to do to build some muscle? Well, 2 full body workouts a week, 1 set per body part. That's it. That's enough to move things in that direction. So
1 set per body part?
That's it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's not going to build the most muscle, but it's going to build muscle.
At the very least, maintain.
Less than that would maintain.
Wow.
In fact, if you want to just not lose muscle, I don't remember what the accurate number was, something like you lose 10% of your strength and muscle for every decade after 30 or 40 or something like that, right? The amount of strength training required to stop that from happening is like 1 workout every 2 weeks or something like that.
Wow.
It's just very protective. But yeah, that study I think is pointing to, and I think it's more complex than just muscle. I think the reason why I communicate muscle is it's like a very easy black and white, do some strength training that'll have a big impact. I also think what's contributing to that is maybe xenoestrogen exposure.
Yeah, I was going to ask. You think there's anything more nefarious at play,
of
like
course.
our exposure to these, endocrine disrupting compounds that seem to be everywhere?
Yeah, I do. I mean, for example, if you take a man, we don't have a ton of data on like, well, how much does that contribute to fat gain and how much does that contribute to these things? But we can use a study like studies that show like you take a man with low testosterone, put him on TRT, okay, just help his testosterone go from low to optimal, and he'll gain some lean body mass and lose some body fat with no other changes. So that's a hormonal signal.
Yeah.
I mean, all these hormone disrupting chemicals, they have to have an effect. And if you asked me this question, Max, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I would have said it's probably not that big of an effect. But as I read more and more about just how much they've permeated everything and how much they're finding in our bodies, there was a study that showed that in our brains, there was something like a
teaspoon size amount of microplastics
in our brain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it has more of an effect than we realize, and I think it has long-term effects on cancer, hormones.
Well, bisphenol
fertility.
A alone was once destined to be a pharmaceutical drug. Bisphenol A was marketed actually at the time as a xenoestrogen and being used to treat perimenopausal symptoms, PMS. Yeah. It was literally an estrogen replacement, and they found better, safer alternatives. And they realized at the time also, I believe it was in the 1930s, that it could also be used to create plastics prior to the advent and the ubiquity of plastics, which obviously has been revolutionary for human society in terms of its safety and its, all of the myriad applications that we now use plastic for. But what we hadn't anticipated was that this chemical is not inert and it has biological effects.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's literally...
I didn't know that they initially researched it as a hormone replacement.
1,000%.
That
was its first designation.
What's crazy about that is I think sometimes we look at these things and we go, oh, they didn't know any better. Or, they didn't know and they were doing what they thought was best or whatever. And what we need to realize is that all markets are driven by profits, which is not a bad thing. I'm definitely not anti-profit. I think that a company's sole job should be to serve the consumer in a way that creates efficiency and profitability. But as consumers, it's always wise to be skeptical and to be cautious. It's always wise to be cautious because they're always going to say, this is fine, this is safe. And the cautious individual, what are they going to miss out if they're wrong? Well, they won't use the latest product. But what are they going to get right? What's going to go right if they were right? Like they'll save their health. Like my favorite example, I've been in the health space for 2.5 decades more. And I remember, it wasn't even that long ago, like 5 years ago. If you said fluoride negatively affected your IQ or your brain, like immediately you would get labeled as a kook and a conspiracy theorist and okay, that person's a complete idiot.
Yeah.
Like that was a big red flag, like, oh, fluoride, oh my God, here we go, roll our eyes. They got a study that shows it actually lowers your IQ. The wellness people have been saying that forever, forever. So more and more I'm becoming that guy that's like, hey, here's this new thing. I'll wait 30 years. Let's see what happens.
Exactly. And I feel like that's the precautionary approach that we should all be practicing. But we're gaslit, as if industry hasn't pulled one over on us before many times.
What's interesting?
Partially hydrogenated fats, lead in paint, asbestos in our building supplies, right?
Everything.
So many, there's so many cases where that's been shown.
Yeah, and artificial sweeteners is one that really gets people's cackles up. But I'm also like, I think I'll wait another 50 years to see what happens with that kind of stuff. It's interesting because the more you start to understand this, the broader your scope becomes, and then you start to see things through a different lens and realize that our human nature is not pro health in any way, shape, or form. Our human nature is not pro physical, mental, spiritual health. Our human nature is to serve our whims and desires, especially in the immediate. And what we overlook is what are we lacking, missing, skipping out over, or what do we sacrifice? So I'll give you a great example. I saw this the other day. We have far more time-saving devices today than we did obviously 50 years ago. We have email and text and calendars and machines that wash our dishes for us and do our laundry for us, and everything's faster. We fly in jets across the world. Like we have all these incredible time-saving devices, yet we spend less time with each other than we did 50 years ago, and we have less downtime than we did 50 years ago. So we create all these time-saving devices, but our human nature is not to have that downtime and to connect with each other. It's to move away from each other. It's to distract ourselves. What's the end result of that? Like a lot of loneliness. We have all these ways to connect, and yet we're less connected than ever. We have all these ways to make life easier, but we're also now suffering the consequences of it. So I think it's important for now. I'm a father, so I'm really careful about this with my kids. I look at everything and I go, okay, is this really better? What am I trading? Okay, yeah, my kid has access to the internet and all this information, but is that really better for them? They have the ability to hear news all over the world. Is that really better for my kids, or is it better for them to really not be aware of things that they don't have influence over? I think if we took that approach to our health, physical health, mental health, even spiritual health, and realize that the default is poor health. And this isn't my opinion. Look at the data. The data shows that the default is mental illness. So if you live like everybody else, you're probably going to suffer from some mental health issue. So depression, anxiety, or worse. If you live like the world tells you, follow the default, you're probably going to be overweight or obese. So probably be obese here soon. And you'll probably have some chronic health condition. You'll probably have immobility issue. You'll probably be dependent on certain medications, right? So what do we take from that? Because here's the argument I'll get. Well, I'm going to be different from everyone else. Yeah. I mean, if you want to not be like everyone else, you're going to kind of have to be different from everyone else. And so I think if you look at things through that lens, it really helps. you understand or at least see where a better path is, whether it's exercise, diet, mental health, connection with people, that kind of stuff.
100%. You can't fix a health condition with the same diet or lifestyle that created it.
No, it's impossible.
Change requires change.
It does. And I think some people are starting to figure that out. There's like this movement now that I'm a little bit cautious, but I'm also pretty positive about that. You're seeing this movement towards health that now reflects a little bit more of what I understand health to be, whereas for a while there it was kind of rejected. So this is interesting. I'm starting to see more people talk about these things, more people a little bit more skeptical about certain things, and they're starting to embrace, and I hate using this term because this term has also been bastardized, but natural food, natural movement, natural whatever. That's also often marketed in interesting ways. But people are kind of like, okay, let's be a little bit more skeptical. Let's look a little more carefully, and let's see what might actually, what might actually benefit us in good ways. And when someone comes out with something new, let me question that just a bit.
Yeah, but like, why are we so quick to call the lynch mob on something that promotes itself as natural, and yet we turn a blind eye to all of the myriad, synthetic compounds, supplements, pharmaceuticals that people are just, will willy-nilly take without doing appropriate due diligence. But yet when something markets itself as natural, I mean, that's where, we raise an eyebrow. It's sort of, it evokes to me that saying that it's like today, just eating healthy, for somebody who, adopts a more healthy dietary pattern or lifestyle, they're instantly labeled as dieting or having like an eating disorder or something like that. It's like, no, even though the norm has become so dysfunctional, it at the end of the day is dysfunction when you look at average just, health, mental health, physical health, spiritual health statistics.
The best example I could give is MySpace. The one that I would say I know the most about, which is fitness. Okay. So I'll stick to that. If you look at the fitness space and the information that comes in from the fitness space. So I go on, social media, or I go on, a search engine, and I want to learn more about becoming fit. Okay. The content creators, whether it's blogs, articles, commercials, videos, clips, whatever, all of that is a market, and all of that has to fund something, right? Nobody does that stuff for free. I get that. The profit makers, or the way to make money around that are largely products. They got good margins. People repeat buy. Like if I give out just information, that's harder to monetize. Like if you create a podcast that is just great information and you don't sell anything, your hope is it gets big enough to where advertisers will want to pay you. But you're not selling anything, right? If I make a product, I've got some really good potential to profit. So anyway, my point with that is, so much of the information is by nature dedicated towards generating some kind of revenue. And so we get this skew of what's important. We get this distorted view of what's important. So when you ask the average person, how much of a role does supplements play? How much of a role do, whatever play in your fitness? They'll typically give it a larger, or at least their actions will show that they give it a larger percentage of impact than it actually has. So the reality is, all the boring stuff, exercise, right? Get good sleep, just drink water. That's like 95% of everything you're going to get out of fitness, or probably more. But if you looked at everything and read everything, it wouldn't look that way. It would look like it's supplements. It would look like it's these new, kind of crazy techniques and new discovered whatever compounds. But it's just not. It's just because it's it's no different than. I'll give you an example. Like I managed gyms for a long time for a living, and the amount of people in a gym, this is already a self-selection bias, of people with a six-pack is rare. It's rare in a gym to see someone with a six-pack, let alone in the real world. But if you go on social media, you think everybody's got six-pack abs. And if I'm always on social media, my view on how many people are ripped is severely distorted. So my view on what's effective and what works and where I should place my value and where I should place my time and energy is going to be skewed and distorted. So it's difficult. One of my goals with what I do, with what we do, is to try and shift that, is to try to create enough information, enough noise to where people get a little bit of a counter perspective and change that. But I think that's why. I mean, if we told if people, I remember Dr. Seeds is he's a doctor, but he's also a researcher. He's one of my favorite people to ask about things like peptides and stuff like that.
Yeah, we've had him on the show.
Love him.
Yeah.
Love him. Him and I were talking about walking for 10 minutes after meals. And he said, Sal, he goes, if everybody just got up and walked for 10 minutes after eating, we would probably solve a majority of type 2 diabetes issues. That's it. Like, even if it wasn't a majority, even if it was a 40%, like, is there a medication that solves 40% of type 2? I mean, no.
And why might that be the case?
Oh, the insulin sensitizing, blood sugar controlling effects of getting a muscle to contract and relax while there's blood sugar floating around is profound. I mean, 10 minutes of walking after breakfast, lunch, and dinner has probably more of an impact than an hour of walking done at another time in the day. I might be off a little bit, but it's that much more impactful just to move. There was one study, I think I might have seen you actually do a clip about it, in fact, where they had people eat and then they just did heel raises. So they were seated. They didn't even get up and walk. They just flex their calves a little bit. And there was like a significant reduction in their blood sugar, which is, by the way, is so funny. Those little, I used to make fun of these machines. Like they look like little cycles, but they're real small, and you put them on the floor. And
I see ads on TV for them.
You just pedal your feet.
They look ridiculous.
Yeah, I used to think about it, like, this is stupid. That's not working out. Now I'm like, it's probably a great idea. Like, do that for 10 minutes after you eat, and you'll just like significantly improve your blood sugar.
And how does this work? Is this due to some sort of insulin independent mechanism where activity causes muscles to suck up sugar from the blood, or how does it work?
100%. Yeah, I think the analogy I like to use is like a sponge. Like you squeeze and you're sucking up more of that glycogen, but there's a GLUT4 receptor that gets activated when muscles are contracted and relieved. The more intense the workout, the higher that happens. So I've heard some people say like, no, do like 5 minutes of intense exercise after you eat. And I'm always like, no one's going to do that. Like, just go for a walk.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I want to go back to that study. First of all, it was, the data was from the 1980s. So it was just, it was about 40 years, 40, 50 years worth of data that they had. But it's so interesting, man. Have you ever seen photos from like just your average like beach day, like from Coney Island from the 70s or 80s?
Yeah.
And everybody looks lean and strong and healthy. Skin looks great. It's crazy how far the apple has fallen.
Yeah, you're growing up in a world now more than the 80s for sure, right? Where a lot of the food that you consumed has been engineered to be so palatable that I believe, and I think that there's data to support this, that your brain starts to model itself after these kinds of foods in the same way that it may model itself after drug use. And so I think, and again, if your definition of addiction was how they created the definition around tobacco, heavily processed foods would fall nicely into that category. You're now growing up in a world where these foods are so well engineered that I think as a baby, as a toddler, then you're growing up, that it's just, this is the norm. Your brain's used to it, your body's used to it, and your body learns how to capture the energy very well. You're consuming more of it, then you're inactive on top of it. You know how much muscle, basal metabolic rate drops, and so that's just the direction that we're going. The best medical solution we have at the moment, I don't think this is a panacea, are these GLP-1 agonists.
People are so polarized about these drugs, especially in our space.
Yeah.
What's your high level take?
Like,
are you anti? Are you for them?
Neither. From what I've learned and read, and I've also interviewed experts in the field, people who've worked with them for 2 decades or a decade. I think, first of all, if we were to compare them to any other non-surgical medical intervention for obesity, okay, so like you cut out like, gastric bypass or sleeve or whatever, it's the most effective, period, from a like weight loss perspective. Like there's nothing comes close. There's nothing we've ever done that comes close to a GLP-1 for weight loss, from a medical intervention standpoint. I think that used properly, and I'll define that, for the right person, I think they can be a remarkably powerful tool. Because I've worked with a lot of people, Max. I've trained a lot of clients, and there's definitely a category of individuals where we're dealing with it's a difficult problem to begin with, but there's certain people who struggle with obesity most of their life. They've got a lot of weight to lose. And it is so hard. Like their attachment to food, the signals that they're receiving are so challenging to work with that it's hard. It's very hard. It's like an alcoholic. I hate using that example, but it's like, okay, we need something to really take the edge off so this person can have time to develop a new relationship with food. And I think that's what GLP-1s can do. I think if you're somebody who's going to lose 80 pounds, you've struggled with food your whole life, your satiety signals, your appetite, your relationship to food is so disadvantageous for weight loss or for sustainable weight loss that you're just in this place where it just feels hopeless. I think you can use a GLP-1. It'll get rid of the food noise. It'll bring your appetite down to a point to where you can then give yourself time to build new connections, new neural networks towards food that are then advantageous. So the best analogy I can give is like, let's say you smoke cigarettes for 10 years, you want to quit. It's very difficult at first, but the longer you stay away from them, the easier it is. As those neural connections to that addiction start to weaken, that's what happens when you don't practice a behavior. As that starts to weaken, it gets easier and easier. And then what makes it even better is if you build new neural networks around behaviors that used to lead to smoking. So now I'm stressed. What do I do now? I go and pray, meditate, paint, whatever. And I develop a new behavior to supplant the old one. That's a wonderful strategy when it comes to things like that. And I think that's how I would use these. So I would if I had a client that was 80 pounds overweight, struggling with this, first off, you're on the GLP-1, great, appetite's suppressed significantly. We're going to strength train and eat high protein because your calories drop significantly. If you don't do strength training, you don't eat high protein, you're going to lose muscle as well as fat. That's just what happens. It's not the GLP-1 that does that. It's a severe calorie restriction that does that. So we want to offset that by some strength training, keep your protein intake high. And then what we're going to do is we're going to work on developing new behaviors around food. So let's become aware of how we feel when we're stressed, what we reach for, when you're bored, what do we enjoy? Let's develop new attachments to foods for different reasons. Most of our attachments to food for most people, especially the obese, revolves around the experience and the palatability. But you can develop, and you've done this, I'm sure, very well. You can develop attachments to food for lots of other reasons, like, oh my God, this one helps my digestion. And so what do you end up craving when you need help with digestion? You actually crave that food, right? And so start to develop those relationships. Give this person a prolonged period of time, maybe a year or 2 years. And then when they feel like this is my new life and I have these new relationships with food and, I've got this, this moderate exercise routine and I feel good, I've lost 80 pounds, then let's slowly come off and let's keep it in our back pocket if you end up finding yourself kind of falling back into behaviors. But I think we have with that one of the best strategies to really solving this forever for people, which before it was, Max, it's so hard. Like if I use, again, my field of personal training and coaching, first of all, your odds of long-term success with a trainer are significantly higher than on your own, okay? But still low. If you're a trainer, and I tell trainers and coaches this all the time, it's like baseball. Like you hit 3 out of 10 balls, you get a 300 batting average, you're great. If you get 3 out of 10 clients to lose weight and keep it off for the rest of your life, you're one of the best trainers around.
Wow, 3 out of 10.
That's how tough it is. That's how difficult. I mean, again, you're surrounded in this world that's like not to make you healthy, and you're going to eat out with people who are not following the same things, and you've lived most of your life being this particular way. Like it's very difficult to break free from. But yeah, 3 or 4 out of 10, you're like crushing it. Like if you get 8 out of 10, you're like a god in the fitness space, right? So I think GLP-1s with a good coach, you now have a tool that can take away that driver that's incessant. And now we can start working on developing those new relationships. And let's get us now to a place where we can start to back off and then see how we feel. I don't think it's going to help people who are like, I'm just going to take this. And what I think is going to happen to a lot of people is they're going to solve one problem but replace it with another. I think they're going to go on a GLP-1, lose a bunch of weight, lose a bunch of muscle. They've solved obesity-related health issues, but now they're coming up with issues related to lack of muscle and lack of strength, which is still metabolic poor health. I mean, there's a viral video of this young woman who lost a bunch of weight, went to the doctor, and the doctor wanted a GLP-1. Doctor's like, you have osteopenia now.
Wow.
And she's like, oh my God, I didn't know GLP-1s cause that. They don't. You just went from overeating to undereating and you did nothing else. And your body got rid of muscle tissue, and you get rid of muscle tissue, your bones are going to weaken.
Yeah, well, at least overeating, you are in an anabolic state, which is at the very least, I mean, carbs are protein sparing, right? So at the very least, you're maintaining your musculature, and by being heavier, you've got this metabolic advantage because you're hauling around all this extra weight, and that's putting pressure on your bones, which probably, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but probably supports bone health. But then suddenly, from one day to the next, now you're in a calorie deficit, but you're eating the same junk. Yeah. Right. So you're not actually maximizing protein. You're losing weight, and you're not compensating for it with resistance training.
To an extent, yes. Although being obese doesn't mean you have strong bones and more muscle in comparison to a fit, healthy person. In comparison to somebody who undereats, probably more.
Don't studies show that like obese people don't actually have lower metabolic rates? Their metabolisms are actually like.
To some extent, I think there's metabolic health issues there that are harder to explain. But I think what'll happen is, here's what you'll run into. I was overeating before, now I'm undereating. I've lost a lot of weight. My body has tried to compensate by slowing its metabolism down. One of the factors of which is I've lost a lot of muscle. So my muscle mass is lower. My metabolic rate's much lower. My nutrient intake is also lower. So nutrient deficiencies will probably go up if you don't change certain things about your lifestyle. And by the way, you will plateau on a GLP-1. We did. So here's what we did. We saw the writing on the wall. And we had many meetings over this. And I'm like, we sat down, we're like, look, we've never seen anything like this impact our space from a medical perspective or pharmaceutical perspective. We need to get ahead of this and communicate this in the right way, because a lot of people are going to cause problems. And there's going to be a lot of noise and misinformation. So we came out with a workout program. It barely sold because how many people are going to use it, but we wanted it to come out and we wanted to communicate it in the right way so that at least it's out. We came out with a workout program that was for people on a GLP-1.
Oh, interesting.
Because, when you drop your calories real low, there's a certain way you should exercise. You'll have low energy initially, and there's a lot that went into it. But we created this workout program. And then what we did is we took on a group of people that we coached. So myself, Adam, and Justin created a group of a little bit more than 50 people that we coached weekly who were on a GLP-1. Okay. Some of them had been on them for a while. Some of them had just started, and we wanted to work with them. And part of the reason was, let's see what the problems are that arise. What are the challenges? So it could help us communicate to this on the podcast. And what was interesting, first of all, a lot of the same problems you'll see with anybody who's, trying to diet or whatever, but there were some interesting issues like plateauing at very low calories. Like there were more than, I'm counting, I just about 50, maybe 55 people in this group. I want to say off the top of my head, there were like 6 people who had lost a significant amount of weight because they had been on a GLP-1 for a couple of years, but had plateaued with like 20 or 30 pounds left. And they plateaued at eating 1,200 calories a day.
Wow.
So they're like, what do I do? That was their problem. All right, Sal, I track my food. I've been on a GLP-1 for 2 years. I lost 80 pounds or whatever. I have 25 pounds to go, or one woman had 30 pounds to go. One person had 15 pounds to go, but I'm eating like 1,200 calories. I had one woman who was eating less than 1,000 calories a day. She's like, I don't have any energy. Do I up my dose? I'm like, no, like you're going to go down below 1,000 calories to try to lose an extra 15 pounds.
Well, her NEAT's probably plummeted.
Everything. And so it's like, what do we do with her? Well, we reverse dieted her, had her strength trained. We built some muscle. And through that process, she increased her calories, got her metabolic rate to become healthier, for lack of a better term. And she started getting leaner again. But there's people are going to run into this. They're going to get on GLP-1, lose a bunch of weight, eat very little, and then go, where do I go from now? And my fear is they're going to say, up your dose. Here, let's just give you a higher dose so you eat even less. Like, by the way, if you look at the data on people who are obese versus people who are frail and underweight, you know who has worse outcomes? People who are frail and underweight. So it's not like this is better than that. It's actually worse. I'm not saying that's going to happen to everybody, but we need to be aware. So with GLP-1s, if we do it the right way and we only do it for the right people, because I'm also seeing a lot of this. I want to get in shape for the summer, so I went on tirzepatide. or bodybuilders now, pre-contest are using it, which is ridiculous.
Really?
Yeah, of course. They're going to use everything they can to. So I'm seeing some of that kind of stuff. And it's like, no. You don't want to do anything like that. I know we have people call in, which GLP-1 should I use? I want to lose 10 pounds. It's like, not a GLP-1. That's not the route for.
And how do they actually work, like subjectively? Like, is it just they kill your appetite, right?
Yeah. So Adam, being the great
biohacker that he is.
Yeah, just this partner that I have. He's like, I'm gonna go on one. He's not obese, right? But he's like, I'm gonna go on one. I'm gonna go on the dose they recommend. I want to know what it feels like, and I'm not gonna hack it with my trainer brain. In other words, I'm not gonna try to like eat more protein and offset it. I'm just gonna see what happens if I just go on one. And he's like, bro, he goes, there were days where I could eat 500 calories and I was fine. I mean, he's a big dude.
Wow.
And he lost weight. He also lost a lot of muscle. And he's like, yeah, we need to talk.
He lost a lot of muscle?
Of course.
Was he continuing to resistance train through
a little bit? It wasn't like he was like, but he wasn't trying to hack it. It wasn't like he was like, no, I'm going to make sure I don't lose. He's like, I want to kind of live, just kind of like follow it like somebody normal would, just to see what happened.
Because his calorie deficit was like just too much.
It was so high. Yeah, he lost muscle and he felt his energy went down. He's like, oh my God, I can barely do a couple sets of squats without gassing out. And he just didn't want to eat. My wife tried it for the same reason. She's like, let me try it. She tried a very low dose, and she's like, oh, it feels like the first trimester of pregnancy for me, when she was like just repelled by food. I'm like, this is crazy. Now, not everybody has that experience, but I think that's very interesting. So yeah, I think the main mechanism. By the way, it improves insulin sensitivity. There seems to be some anti-inflammatory effects for the brain. There's some strange and interesting. This is where I'm paying attention. Effects on hedonistic reward systems that seem to also affect people when it comes to like alcohol, cigarette smoke, other types of addictions, which is interesting. So that's an interesting thing I want to pay attention to. But when it comes to weight loss, a lot of it is, not all of it, by the way, because there's another interesting study I saw, but a lot of it has to do with the fact you just eat less.
Mm-hmm. And is it because of some satiety inducing mechanism, or is it because I've heard it makes you it just makes you feel like shit. It makes you nauseous.
Especially if you take too much. But it tells your body, your brain, you ate, so you're full. Don't eat anymore. Wow. You have all the energy you need. Yeah. But it does have, so here's, and I'm always careful when I communicate this, because I don't want to sell it to a lot of people, because this is going to sell it, what I'm about to say. It has muscle sparing effects. Okay. So you'll lose muscle on it if you just cut your calories, don't exercise, don't strength train, don't eat high protein, because that's what'll happen, regardless of what you do to preserve muscle from a chemical perspective. Even anabolic steroids won't protect you from doing that. But it does, all things being controlled and equal, seem to have a muscle sparing effect. There was one study that I went to the Peptide Congress in Las Vegas last year, actually spoke at it. Dr. Seed's event. I'll be at this one in Vegas again this year. And there was a gentleman that brought up a study on a triple agonist GLP-1 peptide. So you have semaglutide, tirzepatide, which is like a double agonist, I think, and then you have one called retatrutide, I think it's called, which is a triple agonist. And what they did, and I love the study, because up until this point, I'm like, it's a calorie deficit. You do a calorie deficit, you get the same results. They did that. They took two groups of people, same calorie deficit, except this group was on the triple agonist GLP-1. They lost half as much muscle. So they said, oh no, this shows that it's got a preserving effect, which I'm like, oh great. Now we're gonna sell this thing to everybody.
Damn.
Yeah. Interesting.
It's crazy. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I would ever, I mean, obviously I don't medically need it, but I'm in your camp where I feel I'm grateful that we have it. I mean, I do think it's a revolutionary drug, and for people for whom it functions as a fail-safe, who, there are individuals who've tried everything, and, maybe this person lives in an area where it's hard to come by whole satiety-inducing foods, as easily as it is for you and I. And for that person, I mean, this is something that's going to help ward off potentially type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. There's data on that. Cardiovascular events, cancer, maybe even Alzheimer's. We're starting to see data, looking at that, like longer term health outcomes in the brain health sphere.
that are independent of the reduction in caloric intake and stuff like that. There's some interesting effects that they're starting to find its effects on autoimmune issues. There's some interesting data coming out. Lots of anecdotes. So when you talk to, like, I've had a few, like I said, a few doctors and specialists who work with people over years, and they're like, psoriasis reduction and rheumatoid arthritis reduction. There's some studies now being done to look at its effects on autoimmune issues. I think as a tool, it could be very powerful used for the right people. I would love to see, and the doctors that I interview on the show, this is what they do. Like, you're going to work with me. I'm going to put you on a peptide, on this peptide. I'm also going to you also need to tell me, make sure you strength train, and we're going to make sure you hit your protein intake or use essential amino acids in conjunction. And this is the protocol, not just here's your dose and then, come, I'll see you in a couple months and see what's happening.
Did you see that Super Bowl ad that everybody was talking about? It was for one of these direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical companies. I think it was like Hims or something.
Oh, I know who they are. Yeah.
Like that, yeah. And the ad, basically, the first half of the ad presented the problem of obesity in America. Just the overconsumption and the excess and the abundance and how it's driving all of these health problems. Obesity being probably the most obvious one. So the first half of the ad was like actually really good and was like, oh my God, this is did like RFK create this ad? It was like, it felt really empowering and anthemic. And then the last half of the ad, it was like, and the solution is we're offering GLP-1 agonists cheaper than everybody else. And, and I think a lot of people were really upset by it because it presented the problem. It had this, obviously it was an ad. It was paid for by a for-profit company. So it's like, I'm not going to fault them necessarily, but it presented the problem in such a clear way. And then it pointed to the solution being
this one thing,
like more shots, more drugs.
Yeah, no, what's funny about this?
Very disappointing.
What's interesting is, by the way, I'll just tell people, caution the people, remember the industry this is coming from. We're still dealing with the pharmaceutical industry, okay? And they don't necessarily have the best record of, being honest and, and really trying to help people in substantial ways or in ways that are really support longevity.
They profit off disease.
Yeah. So remember that. That doesn't mean they don't have solutions for issues.
Right.
You just got to be cautious. But what's interesting to me is the processed food industry. So if we're looking at if I were to name two of the top most influential industries in like government policy that kind of intertwines with regulations and does things that are a little shady, to say the least, it would be the pharmaceutical industry and the processed food industry. Like, the processed food industry had heavily influenced our food pyramid and what's healthy, what's not healthy, all that stuff, right? How much cholesterol is bad or good or whatever. But also the pharmaceutical industry is a part of that. So you get these two like megalith kind of industries where I'm like, I'm a little skeptical with you guys, right? And for the first time ever, the pharmaceutical industry has come out with a product that is threatening the food. In fact, stock prices of a lot of these processed food companies are dropping because people on GLP-1s are eating less of their foods, and they're actually starting to panic. What do we do? Oh no, this is weird. And so we're going to see two propaganda machines start to compete and fight. And it's really funny to see the food industry come out with GLP-1 diet foods.
I haven't seen this.
Oh yeah, like foods and snacks that are going to help you with this. They're starting to talk about that. And also, I don't know how true this is, but there was an article, I think it was the New York Times, came out with an article saying that these processed food companies are researching GLP-1 agonist blocking additives to put in their food. So let's put these things in our food that are going to make this thing that you have not work, so you can eat more of our stuff. I don't know how true that is, but I would believe it. If somebody said that they're doing this, I'd say, yeah, that sounds like.
That is, that to me, just at first glance sounds so dangerous because what they're trying to do, ultra processed foods are already minimally satiating. That's part of the milieu that makes them so obesogenic, so obesity promoting, right? So GLP-1 agonist drugs increase just the overall satiety of your food. Yeah. And so what are these foods? Like even less?
Yeah.
Like they're marketing themselves as being even less satiating?
Yeah. It was. I read, I don't know how true it is, but I've been seeing this communication on social media. And I wouldn't put it past them. This is this is the most threatening thing to the processed food industry that they've ever seen. They've never felt this scared. In fact, obesity rates are slowing down. The growth of obesity is slowing down in the U.S., and it's too early to tell why. Some speculation is we've hit the limit Some other speculation is like it's GLP-1s, you know.
Are they that ubiquitous? Like, I have no idea, actually, the proportion of people that are actually on them.
Is it 2 or 3 out of every American might be on them already? If I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong. I might be wrong with that.
That sounds so high.
It sounds high. I might be wrong. I would tell you this much. I would bet a lot, unless some crazy data comes out, shows some crazy, maybe look it up.
Yeah, let's ask ChatGPT.
I would bet that 7 out of 10 Americans will probably be on one in the next 10 years that's what I'll say. 6 or 7 out of 10 Americans will probably be on one in the next 10 years.
Let's see if ChatGPT has any answers for us. So I asked, what proportion of Americans are on GLP-1 agonist drugs? As of May 2024, approximately 12% of U.S. adults have used GLP-1 receptor agonist medications, with 6% currently taking them. Yeah.
Okay. So total 1 out of every 10 or maybe.
But it's still, obviously.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people, yeah.
In a very short period of time.
We have 350 million people in this country, right? And
so 35 million?
That's a lot, yeah.
Already. I bet you it's going to go. I mean, it's going to go so high. They're going to be giving these to everybody. That's what I think.
Wild.
I know. You know what? For I'll tell you what. Here's the good news on that. I think it's going to increase the awareness around needing a strength training coach or an exercise coach or trainer. I think it's going to increase the awareness around the importance of protein. I think there could be some potential positives because of that, for sure.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, at the end of the day, I think it's a positive that we. I think you have to take a nuanced view of these drugs. It's not black or white where they're,
Totally.
you know, I mean, you do see a lot. You see this a lot on social media where people are either 100% anti or, you know, conversely, you see like physicians who, you know, get paid to prescribe them, you know, acting as though this should be like the next fluoride, like in our water, you know, and I don't agree with that. I think that the truth is in the middle. Like, I'm super happy that we now have these drugs for people, you know, who have tried everything, who've experienced just lifetimes of yo-yo dieting. But on the other hand, you see them now trying to push them on children, and because we do have an over medication problem in this country in general.
I am so anti that because here's what we don't know, and I this is where I get real skeptical and cautious. A child's brain is the plasticity that's happening, the development that's happening. There are areas of the brain that develop when you're a kid that stop developing when you're an adult. This is why a kid can learn 4 languages and speak them with no accent, right? But if you and I do, we'll always have an accent. And the brain models itself based off of, you know, genetics, but also your environment. And it can model itself in permanent ways based on those things. So like trauma as a child is very different than trauma as an adult, because the brain actually models it. And there's a lot you can do with the plasticity that you have later on. It's not the same though. We all know this, okay? So what you're telling me is we're going to influence the satiety signals, the hedonistic reward system, because we know that it does that in a child, and we don't know how that's going to permanently change the child's brain structure, how they perceive pleasure. We don't know any of that stuff. So no, don't give it to kids. We don't know what that's going to do to their brains in more permanent ways as they grow up and get older, and what that could potentially mean. So no, I'm totally against that.
Yeah. It's not smart.
No, not at all. But yeah, it's not black or white. What I really hate, the message I hate from the health space the most, and this message I've always hated is, well, if you just lack the discipline. You just need a shortcut. Like, shut up. It makes me so upset when I hear that. Some struggles are easy for you, but are very hard for other people. And I always tell people in my space, I guarantee if I examine your life, there are silly, dumb ways that you keep messing up that other people have solved that are very difficult for you. So how dare you have no compassion for somebody and just say it's a discipline issue, and how, you know, you just need a shortcut when it comes to something that you figured out. That makes me very upset. And those are the worst people in my space. And I think they really create a terrible divide. And I think they push a lot of people away. I think that they make people not seek out help from fitness professionals because of bad experiences.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's super condescending. And I've never been obese, but relating it back to my back situation, I mean, yeah, over the past 10 years, when I would bring up my back issues we were talking about this offline, to personal trainers, or chiropractors or physical therapists, or even other physicians, everybody has like a different solution.
Yeah.
And
you're just not working out enough.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Personal trainers would say, well, you're not deadlifting enough.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, actually you're wrong. I've tried to deadlift. Every time I do it, it leads to me being in pain, excruciating pain for the week following. Yeah. So, I think everybody, especially today, would benefit from spending at least a couple minutes trying to imagine what it's like to be in the other person's shoes for a moment before being so reactive, especially in the comments on social media, at the very least.
I had a huge epiphany as an early trainer, because that was me as an early trainer. It's a lot of us really, when we first get into fitness, we think it's just just do it. That's all you got to do. Just follow the instructions and you're there. And I remember I had this epiphany, it was a few years into being a trainer, where I looked at my client roster and I thought it was just a discipline issue. They just need to figure this out. And I looked at them and I said, this is a group of executives, professionals, successful individuals. This is not it. They're very, in fact, they're disciplined in ways that I aspire to be. I need to have more compassion, understanding for these individuals. Otherwise, I'm never going to be able to help them properly. That was a huge epiphany for me. And that road led to me being far more effective as a trainer or a coach. I think we internalize that as well. I think one of the biggest roadblocks to our long-term success in any attribute, especially when it comes to health, is the shame that follows stumbling. I think if you, and I now communicate this as grace-based fitness or grace-based nutrition.
Wow.
Where, okay, you messed up. Now give yourself grace, because the shame and the beating yourself up only leads down the wrong path. And everybody struggles with something, and we're all broken in some way. I mean, that's just a fact of humanity. And if you're a trainer or a coach, if you figure this out, if you really want to help people and you figure this out, this is there's nothing more effective than understanding that with your success. Not any training methodology, not any understanding nutrition or how smart you are. If your clients can feel grace for themselves and you help coach through that as they continue on their journey, your odds of success are very high with them. If you don't figure that out, you'll never beat it out of them. They're not going to beat themselves up you can't hate yourself into being healthy. It just doesn't work.
It's so true. And this is why I consider you guys the best of the best.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, nobody communicates this stuff the way that you do, and the grace and the compassion that you guys both show. And sort of, there's a lot of fitness professionals and influencers on social media that seem to, at least with the thin slice of content that I've perceived, they regularly will lose sight of the forest for the trees, focusing primarily on the aesthetic or, the numbers on the scale or on the weight rack. But you guys have always prioritized both simultaneously, health and aesthetics. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so valuable today. Yeah,
you have to. And by the way, it's not what we're saying on our podcast or how we communicate it isn't revolutionary. It's, you talk to any trainer or coach who's worked with people for 10 plus years, who's made it a career, has a real passion for helping people, and they'll tell you the same thing. You figure this out. You work with enough people, you start to figure this out. If you really want to help them, you start to figure out like, oh, this is the real problem, is this right here. And if I can coach this person to the point where they can give themselves grace, the balance is baked into that, Max. You start to really figure out balance around this. And again, you can't hate yourself into better health. And so when I look at my space, the things that annoy me the most, that really make me the most upset, are the things that steer people, or the messages that steer people away from that. There's always misinformation. That's annoying, right? Like, that's just wrong, right? That's always annoying. But what's more annoying is when people communicate something that might be right, but is also simultaneously taking people away from what is more right. It's like, 10 reps is superior to 6 reps, or this exercise is better than that. That exercise is, who cares? Now the person who liked that other exercise doesn't want to do this anymore. Or you just talked about a hair-splitting piece of advice, or you brought up a study that us, fitness nerds think it's cool, but actually just confused the hell out of Mrs. Johnson. I really, really Hate that. Or the whole, like I just said earlier, a pound of muscle only burns this many extra calories. Oh, cool. Now you just convinced a bunch of people that trying to build muscle isn't an effective way to, positively affect their metabolism or metabolic health. You can't really speed up your metabolism. All right. And then they cite data and say, okay, cool. Now,
yeah, exactly.
What did you just do? You made yourself look smart. That's all you did.
Yeah. It's literally all you did. That person now on the receiving end of that information is going to spend, they're going to be their desire for building muscle might be deflated even by 5%. And they're going to be spending more of that time, in hopes of burning fat on the cardio machine, when we know that, resistance training is just as if not more effective.
This is where the whole myth for people who don't exercise regularly, don't go to a gym regularly, haven't made this part of life, oftentimes they'll view a gym, especially if you just walk in and look around, as a judgmental place. As, oh my, I'm going to go in there. Everyone's going to see what I'm doing. They're going to see I'm out of shape. It's so far from the truth. It's not. It's one of the most inclusive, welcoming places you'll ever go. The biggest, scariest looking guy in the gym. It's probably the one that's going to help you if you need help. The most experienced person. Gyms are not places for the extremely fit. That's where they go to. But gyms are for people who need help. And if we do that right, if we communicate that right, because I'm not interested in trading fitness fanatics. I'm not interested in talking to fitness fanatics. They already got it. Cool. Go do your thing. I'm interested in reaching the unreachable, and there's a lot of people out there that just don't give up. They think it's either too hard, not going to work for me, or they've done it wrong, or man, I tried it and I felt like, judged or terrible, or I just want to enjoy my life by being unhealthy, which is interesting. I'm interested in reaching those people.
Yeah. The gym is I've said this many times, the gym is my happy place.
Yeah.
And if the gym is not your happy place, try to unpack that. Try to understand why it should be. You should strive to make the gym your happy place.
We had a caller call in the other day. So on some of our episodes, we have people call in and we coach them. And this guy called, I think it was like 54-year-old man. And he said, am I working out too much? So I said, okay, well, let's ask more questions. So he was doing about 2 hours a day in his garage gym, but he's been working out forever. And I said, okay, well, how's your progress been looking? He's like, well, I gained 5 pounds of muscle, this last year. Well, that's pretty good. How do you feel? I feel good. Okay, well, you're probably not working out too much. That doesn't mean you can get better results if you work out less or whatever, but it seems to be okay. However, what's making you ask this question? He goes, well, sometimes I go in the garage. I'm like, oh my God, I got to do 2 hours, working out. And it's okay. So the most important thing you should foster if your goal is long-term fitness, if your goal is, I want to do this for the rest of my life. Okay. I want to be able to do this and want to do this forever. The most important thing you should foster is your relationship to it. More important than what my workout looks like, what's going to get me in shape the fastest, what's going to burn the most body fat, what's going to build the most muscle. More important than that is my relationship to this thing. So I told him, if you're finding yourself dreading your 2-hour workout because it's just too long, then you are doing too much. Let's change that approach. Even if you get worse results, which you probably won't, your relationship will improve with this thing that you want to do, hopefully to the day you die. So I tell everybody that, like, when you go to the gym, if you hate it, there's a problem. Figure it out. Figure out why you hate it. It makes me too sore. Okay, do it in a way that doesn't make you sore. I don't like what I'm doing. Then do something else. I don't like the way I look at myself on it. Well, then let's look at that. And a good coach or trainer's job, above all else, is to foster a positive relationship with exercise and nutrition. This is for parents with kids. They always ask me, how should I get my kids to work out? In a way that makes them enjoy it. That's the most important thing. Do they enjoy it? You're doing a good job, even if it's wrong, because you hopefully will make them want to do it for the rest of their life. You can do the perfect routine with a kid. They hate it. I guarantee by the time they're 13, they're going to rebel and not want to do it ever again.
Yeah, you see people at the gym sometimes like just grimacing through their workouts and spending I go to the gym at all hours. My schedule can be pretty erratic, and sometimes I see people that are there. I'm imagining they're there for multiple hours in the day, 2, 3, 4 hours. I mean, granted, I live in Los Angeles, so there are a lot of
there's a lot
obsessive relationships with their, maybe unhealthy relationships with their bodies and fitness. But yeah, I mean, sometimes I'll go to the gym and I'll have like the best workout of my life in a half an hour to 45 minutes. Other times I go and I really enjoy spending an hour and a half in the gym. I'll spend 20 minutes on the treadmill, get my heart rate up a little bit, really, lean into that zone 2, low intensity cardio, and then I'll have like a weight workout, and then I'll go spend some time on the mat stretching and doing mobility stuff, like leaning into my body. And I love it, man. Again, like it's my happy place. And it's also like, I feel like it's always there for me, no matter where in the world I am. There's always a gym.
Yeah, that's ensuring that you're going to do it forever. That's the most important thing that people need to understand. Which, by the way, beating yourself up and hating yourself in the gym, it feels good initially when your motivation is negative because it's a cathartic feeling. I'm fat, I'm gross, so punishing myself. So I leave the gym, I feel like I crawl out of the gym. Wow, that was a good workout. I just killed myself. Why? Because I deserve that beating because I'm such a whatever person. Doesn't last though. Eventually you'll rebel against that, which looks like nothing, like I'm doing nothing now. And I never want to go back again until that negative feeling overrides that. And then you go on that on and off again thing. But the relationship to exercise, the relationship to eating healthy is the most important thing. It's more important than the what you're doing, the why you're doing it. And if you do that, and I say this, I've said this many times on my show, a subpar exercise routine done consistently will outperform a superior routine done inconsistently. Just like a kind of healthy diet that you do for the rest of your life is going to be healthier for you than a super healthy diet that you only do for a couple months and then you stop for a year. And then
that makes total sense. You should also see it as a privilege, I think. I mean, like right now I'm in a phase where I can't work out. I mean, I haven't yet been cleared by my doctor to work out again. And I remember the workout that I had. Man, I remember the workout that I had the day before my surgery. And it was so visceral, like, because I knew that I was about to enter a phase of a month, 2 months where I wasn't going to be able to work out, right? And I just remember so profoundly feeling the sense of privilege to get to go to a place where I got to see what my body can do, put my body to work, like this thing that I've been inhabiting for the past 42 years, that at some points I've been kinder to than others, and at other points I've been maybe a little bit less forgiving to, and just what a gift it is, to be able to be ambulatory and move about the world and to go to the gym and to flex your muscles and to move your joints without pain. It'll
be interesting to see how, because it's a great case study to see how it affects your mental health, your outlook on things as you're less active or unable to do some of those things, because you're going to be acutely aware of its broad ranging impacts. It's not just your physical body. It's a lot of different things. In fact, if you were to categorize exercise as an antidepressant, anxiolytic, it would outperform everything we have out there. There's nothing that beats it for mental health. Forget physical health, for just mental health. So it'll be interesting to see, what you notice, from all that, and then how great it's going to feel to get back to it, especially pain-free.
Oh my God, I can't wait. Well, Sal Di Stefano, always great getting to catch up with you, my man. So fun.
Yeah. Thank you, man.
Of course.
Love doing this.
Remind my listeners where they can find you, how they can support. I know you guys offer all these wonderful programs via Mind Pump, MAPS, and all that stuff. So how can people learn more?
So MAPS Fitness Products, you'll see all workout programs. And the podcast is Mind Pump. You'll find us anywhere, YouTube, Spotify, wherever.
So fun, brother. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, you're the man. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.